9mm versus 40 Smith & Wesson, and what we have today is our Speer gold dot ammunition. You know, I used to not like the 40 Smith & Wesson because I didn't have any experience with it, and about 3 years ago I purchased this 40 Smith & Wesson pistol, and I started testing it, and I realized just how good of a cartridge it is, and I'm very surprised by it. But I know a lot of people don't like 40 Smith & Wesson anymore simply because it's kind of went out of popularity in recent years. But what I want to do today is test our 180 grain 40 Smith & Wesson, our Speer gold dot. I've been looking for that round for 3 years. I could not find it, and I finally found some. And what I want to do is compare that to a round that has almost identical sectional density, our 9mm 147 grain gold dot. If you do the sectional density math, a 180 grain 40 Smith & Wesson is identical to like a 146 grain 9mm bullet. But you know, they don't come in 146 grain, they come in 147. So for all intents and purposes, it is exactly the same sectional density, which basically means, you know, it's the same width that it is to the length and weight and all of that. So it's pretty much exactly a scaled down version of that. So it's really fair to test them like that. And what these are rated at is our gold dot and our 9mm are both rated through 4-inch barrels. Our 40 Smith & Wesson is rated at 1,025 feet per second, which comes to 420 foot-pounds energy. Our 9mm is rated at 990 feet per second, which comes to exactly 100 foot-pounds less at 320 foot-pounds energy. But I do find the 147 grain 9mm to be a pretty good cartridge. It shoots really nice with really low recoil. It's kind of the old school answer to needing a bonded bullet, because if you were to shoot a 147 grain through like auto glass, you'd still have a lot of lead there even if you stripped away your jacket. But I'm going to test them through my 5-inch M&P pistols here, our M&P 2.0, M&P 2.09 5-inch, and our M&P 2.0 40 5-inch, and see how they compare. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to hit my 10% clear ballistic block here. I'm going to go into plain clear ballistics to see what the best potential is of those cartridges. A lot of people wonder why I just do plain clear ballistics, no denim or anything like that, as for one of these shots. And the reason is because a lot of other people do that. So it's really kind of good to look and see what other people's results are that are doing these same tests with the same type of ammo, and kind of compare it and see what I'm getting. But then I also like to do more of my real world simulation, where I put 4 layers of denim up on this first 3-inch piece here that represents our pectoral muscle. After that, I'll have a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum. That's more of our real world simulation. We'll see how they compare that way. And then I'm going to shoot up my steel to see what kind of practical accuracy I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, I'm about 5 yards from the target, which is about 4 yards from the chronograph. So first up, we have our 9mm that is rated at 990 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel. Let's see what I get on my 5-inch barrel here. Speer gold dot, 147 grain. $1,029, $1,033, $1,019, $1,021, $1,010. So just a little bit more velocity than our rated velocity, and that seems about right, because with a 147 grain, you're not going to gain a ton by an extra inch of barrel. 40 Smith & Wesson were rated at 1,025, so even though it's a heavier bullet, rated quite a bit faster. So let's see what we get here. 1,011, if that was a read. 1,022. 1,017. 1,020. Hold that last one, 1,023. So we're actually below rated velocity of a 4-inch barrel through a 5-inch barrel. So we still have pretty good energy numbers here, but they're a little bit closer than what those box numbers, well, it's not in the box, I went to the website, a little bit closer than what those website numbers would have you believe. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, first up in the plain clear ballistics, our best potential, here's our 9mm. All right, let's hit that with our 40 Smith & Wesson. So take a look. All right, so interesting here. It looks like a lot of damage with that 9mm. I think that's partly just from sometimes clear ballistics gets a little bit bubbly when it goes in there like that. But Overall, there's not a big difference there in what I'm seeing. You would say, well, maybe the 9mm has more damage because you kind of looks like that, but it's kind of deceptive because of the kind of the bubbly looking marks there. When you look at our first 3 inches here, you know, our 40 Smith & Wesson's up here, a lot of energy dump because the shape of that bullet. Our 9mm is quite a bit smaller, and just a really big amount of tearing with our 40 Smith & Wesson. With our 9mm, it's a little bit obscured with that bubbling going on there, but a little more penetration with our 9mm. Both appear to have expanded. Our 9mm went to 15 3/4 inches, and that is definitely right. Camera parallax in the back of that block really stretches where, you know, looks like my fingers lined up with that. But yeah, 15 3/4. With our 40 Smith & Wesson, we have about 14.5 inches. So both are pretty acceptable. They both look pretty good. So let's put on our denim, put in our MDF, do more of our real world simulation, see how they compare that way. All right, more of our realistic simulation here. Here's our 9mm. All right, let me set that back up, hit it with the 40. All right, more real world simulation, 40 Smith & Wesson. Ooh, let's go take a look. So definitely, both of those moved that block pretty good, but you know, the 40 really pushed this thing out, like it hit real hard. So let me line this gel block back up best I can here, and we'll take a look here. And here's through our medium density fiberboard. Both of them seem to have expanded after hitting that denim, so that's very impressive. A little bit bigger hole in the 40, but that makes sense because it is a bigger bullet here. And our energy dump in this first 3 inches is very similar. Very similar performance all the way up until about the 9.5 inch mark. Looks almost identical, with the 40 path being just a hair bigger. Now here's where momentum comes into play. You see the heavier bullet of the 40 went straight, the 9mm started to curve down right about here. I can't tell how much expansion we got. It looks like the bullet's probably turned around quite a bit, and I see a little bit of expansion, at least from this angle. It doesn't look like great expansion, but I do see some expansion, and we're at about really close to 17 inches, just barely touching that. With our 40, I can clearly see really good expansion, and our total path there went to about 18.25 inches. That's textbook. Our expansion looks very impressive as well. So looking at this, I would say that 40 edged out that 9mm just a little bit in this testing. It was just a little more consistent. So let's take a close-up look at these bullets, and then let me shoot our steel, see what kind of practical shootability and accuracy I can get with these. All right, so taking a close-up look at these bullets, they actually performed a lot better than what I thought they would have. Perfect expansion, basically, with our 9mm and our 40 Smith & Wesson. Both of them did really, really well. And sometimes it's hard for me to see through this gel. You know, I don't do those measurements that you see on the screen somehow before I pull these out here, but I think most people would know that, but you hear some stuff on here that people say. Now, going through our medium density fiberboard, these actually did better than I thought they would. Our 9mm, I thought they had a lot less expansion than that, but it actually had really big expansion. We got this kind of pulled back on the side. A lot of people will just kind of look at that and say, well, it's not all exactly the same, and they'll just kind of disregard the fact that that has some pretty big petals hanging out, and that's a big deal because, you know, right here, even that's a big bullet. But we can see why it like curved down, because once it hit that that medium density fiberboard, you can see it's kind of inconsistent with the energy. It's going to push one pedal down. That's going to make, you know, here we go, we're going through the gel. It's going to drag right here, and it's going to arc down. And that's just from having, you know, I guess not as much energy and bullet weight as the 40 caliber. And when we look at our 40 caliber through a medium density fiberboard, it's more consistent, and that's what I was seeing with penetration, more consistency there. You know, it has a larger hollow cavity to begin with. It has more mass, more momentum, more energy, and all that. So it's going to more easily, consistently open up those hollow point petals. So when we look at plain gel, almost the same. When we look at going through our medium density fiberboard, our denim, You know, I would say the 40 caliber is significantly better here because that's just more consistent. It's doing a lot better job. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, so I'm 12 yards from the target. I really love 12 yards from the target because it's slightly a challenge, but it's more realistic, real world. And I just love how the Illinois State Police did a study, and they showed that when their officers stopped threats from 12 yards, they were rarely struck by gunfire themselves. When you look at more of the 7-yard numbers, what's happening there is, even though that's the average, they don't tell you that they're picking bullets out of their body armor after. So I like 12 yards. I feel like it's a good distance to practice this stuff from. So I just want to pull up my pistols, try to get a double tap, and just kind of see where they hit for me. So I'll just get a quick sight picture, pop off a couple rounds. Here's our 9mm. All right, I think that would work. 40 Smith & Wesson. A little bit more recoil for me. You know, I feel like maybe getting like 4 shots off might be a lot harder with the 40, because once we start going up and down. So let me try something like that with our 9mm here. It's pretty easy to control. A lot more muzzle rise on our 40. It's doable, but what I'm going to say is, if you're a beginner and you just try to do that, you're probably not going to do it, because what I'm doing with the 9mm is I pull that trigger, just natural timing, I just keep pulling that trigger. With our 40 Smith & Wesson, what I'm doing is making that shot, I'm purposely pushing my wrist back down after that recoil, so it's like boom, push, 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 and that takes a little bit of practice to do. So, you know, for a beginner, 9mm is definitely a little bit better choice for hitting a target. 40 it takes a little more training, but let me paint that back up. I'll back up a little bit, see where I can keep hitting with these. All right, so I'm at my 25-yard marker. I don't think it's a bad distance to you know, train from, especially if you got a pistol like this where it's 5-inch barrel. You know, 5-inch barrels, I do have 5-inch barrels on me most of the time, at least in my vehicle, so not a bad choice if you had to stop a threat. You know, with a lot of stuff going on nowadays, you never know. So 9mm, let's see what this does for me. All right, that just must have been me. It seemed like the point of impact was drifting up a little bit. It just seemed like that for me. 40 Smith & Wesson. I probably only have 1 shot left. Yeah, the point of impact seems like they're going up quite a bit above my sights. So let me shoot from some more distance. All right, 40 yards from the target. Let's see if I can dial this in here. See how this feels for me. All right, feels pretty good. 40 Smith & Wesson. All right, let me back up for 75 yards. Now I use 75 yards. It is just for fun. I enjoy doing that, especially when we have rounds that are below supersonic speed. You know, you get that nice slow velocity, so it's easy to tell if you're hitting. So let me back it up to 75 yards just for fun, see where they hit for me. All right, 75 yards from the target. It does appear one of those shots, I believe with the 40 caliber, sheared off most of the bolt head on that steel target. So I don't know if this is going to hold up. It might fall. The target might fall down, but 75 yards, 9mm. Let's get aim slow. Try to make hits. See what this does. A little bit high, so I think I'm going to have to aim a little bit low. so that shoots pretty well for me. You know, I oftentimes get a lot of people when they see 75 yards, they assume that I hold over the target. What's your hold over, this and that, because they look at a ballistic chart. But when you're actually live shooting a handgun, it's a little bit more things come into play there a little bit. Doesn't happen so much as it does on a revolver, but I do believe that some of the muzzle rise on these slow bullets does move that muzzle up a little bit before the bullet leaves the muzzle. Especially when you got standard pressure with a really heavy bullet. I think it's doing that a little bit, and it might not be enough to show any difference at like 10 yards or something, but that's 225 feet, and that can really multiply that over some distance. I think that's what's going on. So my answer always is I don't hold over. I generally aim center, and more often than not I'm aiming low. So 40 Smith & Wesson, I'm not really sure where this is going to hit. So you aim center with this, see if I can make any hits. All right, so not quite as accurate. I pulled some, but that's probably just me. You know, it's one of those things that is, you don't think about it, subconscious, where if a gun's got a little more recoil, you're gonna hold it a little bit tighter. And if you hold it a little bit tighter, you're gonna shake a little bit more even though you don't see it. So that's probably what was going on with that. But I'm gonna say both of these are very, very accurate here. So when we actually look at, you know, this part's for fun. I just love to do this for fun, relax, think about the performance of the rounds and just shoot for fun from some distance, and that's kind of why I do it. But when you actually look back at the real use of these rounds as defensive rounds, at least 2 5-inch pistols here, we were below rated velocity with our 40 Smith & Wesson, even though we had more barrel length. That kind of makes sense in some way though, because when you push a 180 grain bullet down into a 40 Smith & Wesson, the overall length of that cartridge is actually less than that 9mm. You don't have a lot of powder to work with. You're working with small amounts of powder and a good amount of pressure. So 4-inch barrel, 5-inch barrel, you're probably not going to see a big difference in velocity. Same thing with our 9mm. We saw a little bit more, but it wasn't significant. So they're very efficient rounds in that regard. But I am kind of surprised because a lot of times I've seen really bad performance with 180 grain 40 Smith & Wesson. So what I'm seeing here overall is both were really decent, I would say. It's hard to say accuracy wise. I think you know, at 5 yards that 40 was quite a bit more accurate for me, and I have the same backstrap sizes on these pistols, same pistol frame. So I would say in theory our 40 is a little more accurate, but it is harder to shoot more accurately. So it's one of those things. If I put it in like a bench rest or something, it would be way more accurate than that 9mm, but in the hand not so much. But in our ballistic test here, what I saw was our 9mm did pretty good. Not great expansion through our medium density fiber board in denim, but very acceptable because we did not get over penetration, and we got a lot of good energy dump damage in the front there. With our 40 Smith & Wesson, we had slightly better performance, and it just seemed quite a bit more consistent. You know, you have that bullet to keep moving forward. With its expansion, it just was more predictable in what it did. So I would say in the real world, our 40 Smith & Wesson is going to be quite a bit more effective in more situations than that 9mm, but they both kind of held their own. So beyond that, I really can't say one of them won, one of them lost, one significantly better, one significantly worse. One thing I will say though, street numbers matter a lot more than ballistic gel numbers. And one thing I'm going to leave people with today is something I've been thinking about for a long time. You see a lot of people that really hyper focus on shooting technique and drawing and making those first hits at, you know, really split second speeds. My concern is, one thing I don't really hear people talk about is, what if they have a 9mm? What if they make that shot? What if they make 2 shots and they make decent hits, not necessarily CNS hits, but decent hits, and the other guy with the gun is just still standing there. That happens a lot, and you see that in a lot of the police footage, and they're using 9mm. That's why a lot of times they open fire with 2-3 cops dumping mags, because it's not particularly effective. And having, I guess, a better caliber, a better cartridge, more power, more real world street numbers, I think that's a really important thing to consider, even if you can't necessarily shoot it as fast and easy. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but that's what you get today. Both of these did pretty well. So share your opinion on what you think. And as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.